thanks very much for having me. I've been busy since we moved to Florida in 2004. I started writing because I was a frustrated gardener from Maryland, and things aren't the same in Florida. So that got me mad. I was mad about it, and I started writing, and so it hasn't ended. Um, so today we're going to be talking about how you can be more successful with natives and how we can convince more people why natives are important, and a little bit more about design and how you live with a native yard. My website, which is on the chat, is greengardeningmatters.com, and if you go there, if you go to the green resources pages, that's where the links are to the various articles that I've written, and also there are links to purchase my books. Let's get started here. All right. So this is a meme that I created that sort of set the tone a little bit differently. Like, we need to plant natives because it's the right thing to do. So I wanted to hit a different tone here. So I said, well, let's plant natives because this is an all-American or all-Floridian yard, and it's a patriotic thing to do. So I created this meme with red, white, and blue Florida natives. So tonight we're going to talk about why natives are important and how we get started with, the expectations are not for natives, and how to get started and how to plan ahead. And then, not listed on here, but we're going to also talk about how do you talk to people about natives. All right, if we go back to the upper classes in Europe and in the British Isles, the people were expected to have, if they had formal gardens like this at Belfast Castle in Ireland, then it showed how wealthy they were. And so this was an expectation for all wealthy families to have these very formal, very manicured landscapes with nothing out of place and everything there. And one of the reasons that it shows their wealth is because it takes a lot of gardeners to do that. But somehow it was transplanted across the pond, and we're supposed to be, our landscapes are supposed to look sort of like this without all those gardeners. And it's an unreasonable expectation. And then the expectation is also bolstered by TV gardeners who come in and they expertly put everything together, and they bring all the plants in and plant it, and they say, oh my gosh, here you are, and it's done. But landscaping is not an event, and it's never done because the plants are not plastic. They'll live, they'll die, they'll get too boisterous or too aggressive, and the instant landscaping, you could start that way, but it's certainly not the end because it's an ongoing process. So this was one of my neighbor's yards, and they brought in 3 truckloads full of dirt to build this berm along the front where they could put these plants. They brought in the sod and everything. But then this was installed in the dry season. When the rainy season came, they had changed the drainage in their yard, and they ended up flooding their kitchen, which is in this little alcove here. And so that not only did they pay thousands for the landscape, then they paid more to repair the kitchen. They paid more to take the dirt out. The 3 truckloads of dirt went back out again. So they're probably their 3rd or 4th landscape after this now. So landscaping is not an event, and we've been trained that it is, but it's not. It's an ongoing process, and we can do it a little at a time. Now, businesses are set up to have us put in these pretty flowers and everything like that so we can create a managed landscape. But this is a false narrative. These plants that are here are mostly annuals, and as a botanist, I can tell you that their life cycle is at the end. They have germinated, they've grown, they've produced flowers and seeds. And so when you take them home, they could live for a while, but the plant itself has accomplished its mission. So when you take them home, they're going to die. Um, and then we're also sold here in Florida that let's put in fall mums. Well, the mums are not native here; they're native to Asia. They don't do well here. So you could have mums, but put them in a container or treat them like a bouquet. They're not going to do well in the yard. And then we're also offered invasive, known invasive plants. Nandina, well, I'm in North Florida. You probably don't have it down there, but down there they probably sell Mexican petunias and all kinds of other things that are known invasives in Florida. And so this is not what we want. And many of the plants, these pretty on the shelf plants that are offered, also have systemic insecticides in them. So if you are making a butterfly garden, the last thing you want in your butterfly garden is a poisoned plant, because you'll kill the baby caterpillar, the baby butterflies, which are the caterpillars, and you kill the pollinators too, because that insecticide doesn't go away. So Doug Tallamy has changed the narrative about native plants, and his research as an entomologist has helped people realize that plants need to be more than just pretty in our landscape. They need to be part of the local ecosystem. And I have to say, the other day on Facebook, someone called me a native plant Nazi. And it was an interesting conversation. Other people came in and defended me. Um, but I gently suggested that she read this book and gave her a link so that she could buy it, and why native plants are important. So we need to um, change the way we're talking about it. And Doug Tallamy has helped us. And of course, now he's got another book out called Nature's Best Hope. And the short answer to that question is, we are nature's best hope. Native plant enthusiasts um, are nature's best hope. So here are some of the reasons why we want native landscapes. So we want lawns that are not poisoned, because if you poison your lawn and over irrigate your lawn, then, well, if you poison your lawn, you're going to chase away the pollinators, and when you and the birds and all of the insects that are part of the ecosystem. And in the research that we did for our Climate Wise Landscaping book, um, I, I found a new way of thinking about saving water. Not only when we save water, do we save the water itself and our aquifers and cut back on the water that's going into our waterways, we also save energy. So if you save water, you are reducing greenhouse gases, because it takes energy to extract the water and to move it to us with enough pressure so that we can take a shower. So all of that takes energy. So when we save water, we're also saving energy. Um, the other thing about the landscape-wide pesticides, the EPA has said that the non-point source pollution, which is our yards, is the biggest source of pollution of our waterways on a nationwide basis. And most of it is caused by the chemicals that are put in our lawns. And so I have here, don't feed the algae, because when you put synthetic fertilizers on your lawn, then it ends up in our waterways. So these are some of the reasons why we need it. And then when you stop poisoning the lawn, then you end up depending more upon Mother Nature's predators, because they will wax and wane in concert with the pest bugs. So the more bugs there are, the more predators there are. And if the pest bugs are reduced, then the predators are reduced. So here we've got some wasps, and here's a cicada killer with a ground nest in my freedom lawn. And if I had been poisoning my lawn, then she wouldn't have had any place for her nest. And so when you invite the insects into your yard, you also invite the birds into your yard, because almost all of our birds, even hummingbirds, eat insects. So if we want our yards to be part of the local ecosystem. So it all comes together. And some of the attractive insects like the monarch butterflies are the charismatic insects that people or talk about, that we need to plant more milkweed so that we can save the monarch butterflies, because they do their amazing migration down to Mexico. And here in Florida, we're not supposed to plant the tropical milkweed, because it stays around too long and the monarchs get sick. So we have all of these beautiful examples of what would happen when we stop poisoning the lawn and we put in more natives: the snow square stem, the laetris, the milkweed, and also we need to leave snags in our yard. So where do we get started? Well, the Native Plant Society, and probably most of you know this, has a wonderful tool when you go to fnps.org.plants, where you can choose natives in the plants that are native to your county. So I'm up in Clay County, so stuff that I grow up here is not necessarily going to do well where you are. And of course, we are very fortunate in Florida that we have the fan group of native nurseries. And so if you type in plantrealflorida.org, you can find a native nursery near you, or find nurseries that have a plant that you're looking for. And the Native Plant Society has plant sales and stuff, and we are the ones that are the feet on the ground that are making natives more accessible. So when Marjorie and I wrote this book, Marjorie actually was in the previous photograph of Buying the Native Plants, and she's an illustrator and a designer, and she actually is the editor for our Palmetto magazine. So we wrote this book because at a Doug Tallamy presentation, an in-person presentation several years ago when we were meeting in person, a woman raised her hand. She said, "I have a small Florida yard. Where do I get started? My yard is filled with non-natives." And he didn't have an answer. Well, it'll be a long answer, but our book answers her question. So here is the end result after we do all the step-by-step. Here is the improved yard. And we took a small yard that's about 1/3 of an acre. And so we went through step-by-step of how do you put in the various things. Now you can do it all at once, and you can do an instant landscape. But most people do not have the funds or the time to get it all done at once. So we talk about how you plan ahead. You need to find out where the pipes are underneath your yard. Look up to make sure that there's no wires or anything in the way above your planting place. So we talk about how to plan, and we assume that most people would do it in sections, and we make it so that you can do it without professional help for most of these. So our end yard, we have a place for the humans in the back. We have various types of screens and wild habitat areas and stick piles and stuff. And how do you do that on a very small yard so that it's completely illustrated. So the first thing you do is determine your flow of stormwater, and you need to do this in both the wet and the dry seasons, because we've got a 5-month wet season that it's going to cause some flooding. Like my neighbor across the street, this is a swale that's by the road, and so when it's the wet season, it floods like this. And he has a lawn there, but he probably should have rushes and a rain garden in there instead, so he's not trying to mow the lawn when it's all muddy. And the plant populations in wet areas will often indicate whether some piece of land is moist or not. So this white top sedge will probably indicate that there is or has been a moist area there. So that if you know your plants, then you have some idea of where things are. So when you're planning your yard, you need to plan for the overflow. Now we recommend that you put in rain barrels, because rain barrel water is much better for watering your plants both inside and out, because rain barrel water does not kill the microbes in the soil. And so purified water that comes out of our tap kills the microbes in the soil. But the plants and the soil working together need those microbes. So rain barrel water is superior for that. And when we sequester the water in rain barrels, that means that it's not going into the storm drains, and it's not going into our waterways, and it's not causing pollution. So it contains some of the water to start.
Hey, Jenny, we have a couple questions.
Okay, fine. This is a good stopping point.
What about reclaimed water? Does it kill the microbes like, regular potable water does?
Probably not as much, because the reclaimed water should be would have gone through some kind of filtering or something, but it would not be directly out of the tap. So it's probably not treated for that.
Yeah.
The problem that we have, if you have reclaimed water system, you have to water on a regular basis, whether your landscape needs it or not. So that causes a problem of watering just enough, because the reclaimed water, you cannot let it sit there. You have to empty it.
Yeah. So Victoria has a question about rain gardens. She says, what does a rain garden look like in the dry season? Is it all dead?
Well, I'm not going to talk about rain gardens here, but I have articles on my website about rain gardens. But yeah, the number of plants that we can use in rain gardens here in Florida is limited, because the plants have to be able to withstand standing water and drought, because that 7-month dry season doesn't allow moisture-loving plants or obligate moisture plants to be in a rain garden. It has to, so it's a pretty short list. So when I moved down from Maryland, I had a rain garden in Maryland, and so when I came down here, I built some rain gardens, and I put in some cardinal flowers in my rain gardens, and guess what? They died, because in the dry season they didn't have enough moisture.
Thank you.
Okay. So the typical Florida landscape is hedges, a lawn, and lone trees in the lawn. I took this photo in the Villages. I'm sure you're aware of this. And this is a native tree. It's good that they have a native tree as the lawn. But here's the problem with the lawn, and this is particularly for the magnolias. This is a beautiful southern magnolia, but these magnolias loses their leaves all year round. They're leathery leaves, so you may even have to rake up the leaves before you mow the lawn because they're so hard and leathery. And this person has these two shrubs right next to here, gravel and a vertical edge. So there are whole kinds of problems here for the people who are mowing this yard. The next door neighbor has pavers around the garden areas, so the people mowing over here have an easy way to mow that doesn't require somebody to come back with a string trimmer and trim next to the vertical edges that you couldn't mow around. So that's one of the things that you want to do is reduce your lawn, but the lawn you have left, you want to make it easier to maintain. So this is what we recommended for the magnolia. So we have a grove around the magnolia. Now magnolias are acid loving trees, so you would choose plants to plant around them. And how large should this be? It should be the same or larger than that leaf drop area. So when all those leaves drop down, they would drop into the grove and not on the lawn. So you would reduce your maintenance. You would make it easier to mow because you've got a nice round edges. You would have created some habitat for birds and insects and birds, and you have actually cooled your landscape by having these larger plants, because the larger plants actually transpire more water. Transpiration is the process of where the plants take water up from their roots, and it is drawn up through the tree and it evaporates into the air. And when the water goes from a liquid in the tree, in the plant, to water vapor in the air, it actually cools the atmosphere. So the more trees and shrubs that you have, the cooler your yard is going to be. It's not just the shade, it's also the actual transpiration. And an oak tree, not a live oak, but just a regular oak, can transpire 400 gallons of water a day in the summer. So that's a lot of water into the air. So we need more woody plants in our landscapes and less lawn. All right, so if you're buying trees, let's be careful about what kind of trees we're buying. So here's a magnolia. It's in a big box store. It's been topped. And the old gardener's tale is that buy the bushiest plant you can find. And so the growers top the trees so they're nice and bushy. But when you top a tree like this, you actually shorten its life. And when you bring a tree home like this, you're going to have to do careful pruning over years to create a new leader so that the tree can grow. But it will not easily recover from this. Also, this tree had about a 3-inch caliper, which is too big and too old. It's been in the pot for too long. So it's not a good investment. Much better to buy a smaller tree that will catch up to that big tree. It'll be cheaper, less work on your part, less water. And when you have a container grown tree, you need to rinse all of the growing media away. And this is not what we've been told. But if you go to Informed Gardener, this is Linda Chalker Scott's website, and she has done the research. She's an extension agent in Washington State, and there's all kinds of horticultural myths on this webpage, which I have used extensively as I've been doing my research. So this is a tough love kind of thing to do for a tree. But this way you'll find the circling roots, you'll find the root flare, which should be above the level of the soil. And even if you have to break a coiling root, it's going to be better for the tree in the long run. The other thing that happens when you take all that rich growing medium, probably with fertilizer balls and stuff like that, away from the tree, and you just put in the lousy soil from your yard, the tree will not, the roots will not wind around and around, because that's where the rich soil is. They're going to spread out. And in Florida, we want the roots to spread out into the soil around it so that it's more drought tolerant and more wind tolerant. If you don't rinse away that growing medium, then the roots will wind around and around. Now, that's a harsh treatment for a tree, so you're going to need to irrigate generously for quite a while until the tree recovers from that. So you're going to need to give it some tough love, give it enough water. This is a 3-gallon watering can here. So once a day on a 1-inch caliper tree for probably several weeks or more, depending upon what kind of tree it is and what time of year it is. So it'll be a little work for you. You build a berm around the planting hole. All right, and we're going to talk about the planting hole in a minute. But people, when I do presentations like this, I said, oh, you mean to rinse the root? People argue with me. They say, no, that's not right. I've been planting trees for 40 years and they're fine. Well, here's the reason. This is in California. These are copper beeches. And these trees were probably planted 20 years ago. And so what happened was that they had left the plastic growing cage around the tree, and the tree choked itself off because the roots went around and around. And so the person who planted these trees probably thought he did a pretty good job, because they are magnificent until they're not. So this is what happens with circling roots, and that's why you want to rinse the soil away. So it's a hard lesson, but
hey Jenny, we have a question from Cassie.
Okay.
She says, if a tree has been planted in the wrong way in the past few months, is there any way to help it along, or are we stuck with just leaving it the way it's in the ground?
Yeah, it depends on how long you've left it in there. If it's just been a couple of weeks, you can dig it up. But if it's been several months, probably not. Okay, so here is what you can do to entice the roots to grow out. Is you want to enrich the soil outside of the planting hole. So it segged right into my next slide. So this is actually a little close, but if you make your own compost, which I do, composting is a wonderful thing. You do a top dressing around the tree. This is a sable minor that I planted probably almost, well, about 17 years ago, and now it's huge. So what I'd like to say is that this compost worked. But you do it around the outside of the planting hole. So if you have a large planting hole, you do it outside the planting hole. And in a few months, you can do it again. And the next ring of compost that you put around it will be farther out. And the next one will be farther out. So what you are doing, and you don't dig in the compost, you can put mulch on top of it, but you don't dig it in. And what you're doing here with the compost is that you are adding to the microbes in the soil. And so the soil would become richer outside of the planting hole, and that way you're enticing the roots to go out. All right, so actually it's not a one answer for everybody. If the native habitat is nutrient poor, you would want to not do this very much. But in our yards are not native ecosystems. The hand of the gardener is always in play. So if you want to encourage one tree or one shrub or something like that, then go ahead and do the compost top dressing to give it a boost. And I've done this for magnolias, self-sown magnolias in wooded areas, and the ones that I do this for actually do grow much quicker or much larger and lusher than the ones I don't. So if you want to push a plant, this is the way to do it. All right, if we want to talk about shrubs, again, the typical Florida landscape is a fringe of foundation plants. And when we moved into our house, there were 6 little balls in the front yard, in the front of the porch, that I couldn't identify. I didn't know what they were. They sort of looked like boxwood, but they weren't because they didn't smell bad. So I didn't know what it was. It took me a while to figure out that they were male clones of a Yaupon holly. So it's a dwarf Yaupon holly. It was male that never had any berries, but they didn't stay small. You know, it wasn't very long before they were up past the porch railing and they outgrew their spot. And I'm sure you've seen houses with shrubs out covering the windows. And of course, the view out through a shrub is not very good. So let's keep the shrubs away from the house and just do bunching grasses or cottage gardens next to the house. So what we did in looking at the shrubs in our yard is to put them around the edges and make groupings around trees, so that they form their own little ecosystems and give you coolness and privacy and give you a good feeling around the house. And if you plant deciduous trees, then they provide shade in the summer, but they let the sunlight in the winter. Now, where you are, winter is not as severe as it is where I am. We had frost last night, and we're expecting again tonight here. But having the sun be able to get in the winter helps your heating costs, and in the shade in the summer helps your air conditioning costs. So you could be smart about that. Also, the other thing about Florida, especially in South Florida, are all those ficus hedges. So you could have a hedge row, which is made up of different kinds of plants. Now, again, you're not going to have oak leaf hydrangea down where you are, but you can do, an assortment of different kinds of plants. Plant them far enough apart so they have their own space and so they don't need to be trimmed. So this is a hedge row. And choose the plants so that they have seasonal variations. So something is always going on. Also, this is not my yard. One of my neighbors, she has some Asian azaleas, but she also had some native azaleas and beautyberry and other shrubs in here. So this is, and she didn't really do anything to it. It just grew, but here's the house right next to it, on the neighbor's house right next to it. So it did give her very good privacy without the work. And here is the University of North Florida, where if we have an in-person conference next year, it's going to be at this site. And we had it here in 2013, if you came to that. And here is a site across the pond from where we had the hedge, where what they have back here is totally unmanaged. Nothing is happening back here, but what they did is they put a neat edge of native plants around it. And so when they mow, it's easy to mow, it looks civilized. And what we need to keep in mind if we live in neighborhoods is that the house should not look like a mess. I had some person comment on one of my posts, and she said, "Oh, I hate native landscapes because it looks like vagrant housing." I guess she didn't know that vagrants don't have houses, but whatever. Sometimes it's hard to do that, but when you're talking with people on social media, never get angry. Gently coach them about expectations and why it's important. All right, and this was my Freedom Lawn, and a Freedom Lawn is free from fungicides, free from insecticides, herbicides, synthetic fertilizers, over irrigation. When we moved in, the lawn guys from the previous owner stopped by and said, "Oh, we'll continue the service. This is what we'll charge you." And I said, "No, that's okay." And they said, "Well, it's going to die if we don't treat it." I said, "That's okay." But here it is, like 5 years later. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful lawn. We took out the lawn here because this was in the shade, so we put in a mulch path and shrubs over here. But when you look closely, the lawn is not just the St. Augustine grass. It's made up of all kinds of things. So I've got dollarweed, I've got St. John's wort, I've got rain lilies, I've got asters, I've got toadflax, and hundreds of other things. I've got fog fruit, I've got sunshine mimosa, I've got just all kinds of stuff that's growing. So we still have lawn, about half of what was here originally. But it's not a monoculture.
Hey, Jenny, I have a question about mowing height and frequency for your Freedom Lawn. I mean, do you keep it at 3 inches, like,
Four inches.
4 inches? And
Yeah.
how often do you mow it during the growing season?
Not that often. We let it go to seed to some degree. And in the wintertime, we don't mow at all. So from the end of October through March, it doesn't get mowed at all.
Thank you.
All right, so what I wanted to show you here is, well, how do you get rid of lawn? Here's one thing we did that we call this the shady triangle. And we lost this tree and another one, actually several, in the 2004 hurricanes. So we moved in June and we had 4 hurricanes that year. So we had lost this tree. So we just decided to not mow this area. And so here are some sweet gums out here. And across the way over here, this is our septic tank raised bed. So this is not mowed very often either. Now we do mow it, so it's more of a meadow. This has changed over the years. So about 5 years later, here's that same triangle from a slightly different angle. The stump would have been about here. I planted southern magnolia and a sweet bay magnolia that I had transplanted from somewhere where they had sprouted, where it was inconvenient. And I didn't plant the goldenrods. They planted themselves. I did plant some muley grass and some other grasses, but basically this is what it turned into. And as you can see over in the mound over here, we've got um, Biden's alba, the Spanish needles. So the pollinators just love that. So we mow this about twice a year. And then this was just last year. And so you can see how big the magnolias have gotten. So they've crowded out the grasses. So, you know, I do enlarge it, and you can see again the mound. So that is sort of the history of that. So the edges of lawn are the most noticeable. So what you'd want to do is make it easy to mow. So as my husband does the mowing, so we have rounded edges, rounded curves, no vertical edging, so that he can just ride around here one sweep, and that's it. As people who might live in a subdivision, you'd want to have a neat edge. These light grasses here is the second year of the Elliott's love grasses. I thought they would be a really good edge here, but the next year they were gone. So I met up with David Chiappini, who had been the supplier for my native landscape. I met him at a big native plant sale. And I said, "So my love grasses died. What what should I do?" And he said, "Don't plant them there again." So it's actually it's actually one of the best pieces of gardening advice I've ever gotten, is to listen to your landscape, and if something is not working, do something else. So you I can talk to you, other people, experts can talk to you, but there are things that are happening in our soil, things that are happening somehow that are unexplainable. But you listen to your landscape. Don't get discouraged. Now I have muley grass and also some Stokes asters here, so that, you know, actually it's probably here now, because we kept on taking out this lawn. All this area out in front of our house was sodded. So the whole area out here was sodded. They left some trees around the edges. So what we did is we stopped mowing this area, and we kept it as a meadow for a number of years. But we missed a couple of falls to dig out the trees and stuff like that. So it turned into a forest. But out here at the corner, right here, I have a little sign that says that this is backyard habitat, a certification from the Wildlife Federation, so that the neighbors know that what we did out here, because this is the front yard, we did on purpose. So here's some of the edging. So in the competition for water, trees will always win over lawn. So pulling the lawn, whether it's a freedom lawn or any other kind of lawn, away from the trees is better for the roots, because most trees have surface roots. Some have more extensive surface rooting than others. But eventually these would grow bigger and the lawnmower would hit them. So it's bad for the lawnmower, bad for the trees. So we pull the lawn away. And I don't do this every year. About every third year, I make my way around, sort of like painting a bridge. So when I finish one end, and I start over again, take out more lawn. So each year, my husband has less lawn to mow. So the edges end up being like this. And these ferns grew themselves here at the edge of the wooded area between us and the next neighbor. So I have cinnamon fern, I have royal fern, I've got netted chain fern. But this is a very nice edge for the lawnmower, because the lawnmower just goes right under the fronds. And you know, if some of the grass leaks into the wild area, when I come by to reduce the lawn, I come out again and the ferns keep moving in. So, you know, it ends up being a movable feast here. But when you take out lawn like that, you have to do some maintenance. So this is a sprinkler head for the in-ground sprinkler system that was included in our house. It draws water from the lake. We back up to a 110-acre lake. But this was the edge of the lawn over here, right next to the woods. And so this was an in-ground sprinkler head that popped up in the lawn and sprinkled that way. But my husband went around those edges where we had moved away from the lawn, and he raised them up on pipes and put different sprinkler heads out. So we needed to make that. Now, if you look at this, there's a magnolia that's growing right here, too close to the sprinkler system. So this was moved so that it would go somewhere else where it was not going to interfere with the infrastructure. Now, the temptation is when you've got edges like this that you're doing just to chop off trees. But when you do that, the trees end up surviving. And so you end up with even a bigger maintenance problem because the tree ends up looking, you know, building up more tissue underground and keeps on sprouting. So it's easier in the long run to just dig them up. And you want, you know, here's another instance where you want to, shows you what not to do. The purpose of a no lawn landscape is not all mulch. So this is a site that we visit on a fairly regular basis. It's the military site, Jack's NAS site. So we go there for groceries. And this, they took out a lawn here. And we thought, oh, well, what are they going to do? Well, what they did is they put in mulch. They put down weed barrier cloth and mulch. But they didn't take out the sprinkler heads. So they still irrigate the mulch. So the weeds come up through the weed barrier cloth. And you know, I know they're struggling with it, but this is not a beautiful landscape. It should be filled with grasses and stuff. The mulch would never look good for long. So you need to change your irrigation. Use drip systems if you've got vegetables maybe, or if you're planting a tree and you can't drag your water down there, put in drip systems while the trees are being established. So reconfigure that because just leaving the irrigation system in place is not reasonable. Okay, so here's the story of a beautyberry. So it planted itself here at the edge. Here's the edge of the lawn right here. Okay, but it had water oaks around it. So again, this is not a natural area. This is my yard. So I decided that I wanted the beautyberry more than I wanted the water oaks. So I dug out the water oaks, and so it looked like that. So I dug out those water oaks, and this is what it looked like. But then the next year, look how it responded. So it, you know, as the hand of the gardener shows here, I chose to encourage the beautyberry. And if this was a tree and I wanted a tree here, I could have put a ring of mulch around, not mulch, compost around it to encourage this tree because I want it. So yeah, we don't have wild areas in our lawns. This is not it's not the forest. This is still our yards. Okay, so where we go from here. Marjorie and I, as part of our goal for the step-by-step to a Florida native yard, created this PowerPoint. And this is available on the on the FNPS website, if you look under resources and you look under downloadable documents, it's there. It says why native landscapes are important, Ginny Stibolt. And when you download it, it is a PDF file, but there is a link to a PowerPoint. So this is a PowerPoint that has about a 10-minute script that goes with it. We want you to download it. We want you to show it to garden clubs, municipalities, anybody else. I want you guys to be the feet on the ground to help make natives the new normal in Florida. So that is my presentation. And if you have other questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Thank you, Ginny. If you would respond to the chat questions, if we have any.
Sure. Oh, here is how to get to that, by the way. All right, so resources, downloadable documents. Not the coloring book.
Do we have any questions at this point for the membership?
And so here it is. So this is how you download it.
Yeah, I have pasted the direct link right in the chats.
Okay, good.
So I have a question. Where can we buy your books? You've got what, 5 books that you've written?
5 books, yeah. And I just turned in the manuscript for a 6th book, but that's not available yet. So let me unshare my screen. I don't know how I unshare my screen.
Maybe I can do that for you.
Right.
Well, I don't know. So what is your upcoming book about?
The upcoming book is, yeah, you should probably turn me off somehow. It says new share. So.
There we go. I turned you off.
Okay, good. Good. The new book is called Adventures of a Transplanted Gardener. So it is less of a textbook than my other books, which are written as how-to kinds of things. I mean, they're written at a low level. I used to teach 7th grade, and so I always write at that level because some people don't have English as their first language and want the science, even if it's hard science, to be clear. But this one is a first-person book for people who are moving to Florida. So it's it was different to write for me. And you know, my husband Dean Avery is a character in the book because we've been doing these projects together. But there's 1,000 people that move to Florida every day, so that's a big market. But what I want you guys to do is to work, and you're the biggest chapter, so there's a lot of feet on the ground there, is to work with the local people and with any group that will listen to you to help change people's minds from what has been ingrained into expectations for landscapes. So I think it's an important work that FNPS is doing in general, but we can all help. And if you're on social media, I answer people who are ignorance, not the exact word, but people who are not in the know about why native plants are important. I always answer politely. And if you're dealing with your municipalities or your garden clubs and people argue with you, always be polite. Never get angry, because that way you will never make progress that way.
Yeah. So
one of our members has asked the question, what's the best way to get started?
The best way to get started is to find a place for a butterfly garden. Well, the best place, is to stop the poisons. That is the absolute must for any kind of habitat garden. Is the insecticides, the pesticides, all of those things, you need to stop that. That's the first thing. The next thing is, if you've got a lawn tree, build a grove around it. Build a butterfly garden, and it's best to have 2 different locations for your butterfly gardens because you want them in the sun. And so you would have one that gets the morning sun and one that gets the afternoon sun, so that the butterflies and the other pollinators can get to it all day long, because the insects are cold-blooded and they are not like the birds, are not up early. They don't get up until a little bit later in the day, so when the sun comes out. So that is usually the place to start, because that is going to be what people are interested in. I have a story about the placement of butterfly gardens. When we moved into our house, I put an herb garden right outside the kitchen, and the kitchen window is where we usually eat. So I had all kinds of herbs there, but I had started planting some tropical sage, and it had reseeded. It planted itself into my herb garden, and that it attracted the butterflies and the hummingbirds, which were much more interesting to watch than watching the herbs grow. So the butterflies and the hummingbirds particularly forced us to change what was an herb garden to a pollinator garden. So put the pollinator garden where you will enjoy it, where your family can see the butterflies and the hummingbirds. So that's what makes it enjoyable. So I'd say little by little, it seems daunting to make the change, but just do what you can when you can.
And Ginger asked, how do you maintain your grasses as they move through the seasons?
The turf grass?
She just said grasses.
Okay, if it's bunching grasses, I don't do anything to the bunching grasses. The muley grasses, the Fakahatchee grass, I just don't do anything to it. Let them grow the way they are. If they get too big or I want more, I can dig them out and separate them so that I have more. But for the turf grass, all we do is mow it. We don't do anything to it. And there is still some St. Augustine. We moved here in 2004, hasn't seen any pesticides since then. There's still some St. Augustine. Of course, it is native, but it does better in the sun and does better down by the lake. But we haven't done anything to encourage it particularly.
Manuel asks, how do I know what local plants are good under the shade or sunny conditions?
Craig Hugel wrote a very nice book on shady plants, for shady plants, natives for Florida. If you go to my resources page on my website, on my blog page, if you slide down, there's a link to Craig's book from there. The other really good book on plants, because my books are more gardening books, not plant books particularly. It's how to get things done, how to be successful. The best, I think, gardening book for Florida is Gil Nelson's Florida's Best Landscape Book. So this is also a really good resource. It's got drawings and photos, and he says, well, what are the good points about each plant? What are the bad features of each plant? What should you plant with it? What could be mistaken for it? What's a similar plant? So it was designed for native plant professionals, but it is certainly the best resource for starting from scratch. If you want to know what your native plants are, you bring the book with you when you're shopping, and you say, okay, how big is it going to get? Do I want this? No, look, it's going to be too tall, so that you would become informed. So educating yourself. And again, you'll try stuff that's supposed to be perfect for your yard. Some of it will work, some of it won't. Don't get discouraged, keep going. That's my advice.
Ginny, Victoria asked the question, how do you choose between deciduous versus evergreen plants, particularly shrubs?
They both have their strong points. I mean, where you are, you have fewer deciduous choices. Most of your stuff is evergreen, because you get down closer to the tropics. They have their advantages. So if you're planting a screen so that you want to cut back the dust and the sight and the sound from alleyway or something like that, you would want at least some evergreens in there, so that you would have that screening. But again, if you're planting it next to your house, the deciduous is probably better.
That was, somebody was again asking what the title of the reference book was.
It's Gil Nelson's Florida Best Native Landscape Plants. 200 readily available species for homeowners and professionals. And again, it's on the resources page on my blog. So there's a link to his book there. Gil Nelson.
Rebecca, did you have a question?
Nope.
It looks like Linda's iPad, they have a hand raised.
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me too. Normally we ask people to put the chat rather than than to do a voice. Rebecca, do you want to unmute that then?
If I can find it.
Oh, I've got it. Well, maybe not. I can ask her to unmute, but she can't unmute because
No, you have to do it.
yeah, it has to be done through the.
Okay, sorry, Linda, put it in the chat.
Yeah, put it in the chat, Linda. It's the best way to get it through. Were there other questions?
Well, I would like to congratulate your chapter on raising all that money. That's really awesome. Good job, you guys. Really wonderful.
Yeah, that was actually an incredible response that we received on it. I had frankly thought with the pandemic and the weather and all that kind of such that we would have some troubles getting the fundraiser going, but Rebecca.
Oh no, Michael, this is Dunedin.
But the group, Rebecca and all of her assistants, just did a phenomenal job with that.
Yeah, that's very good. And maybe there's ways that you can build on that and do other smaller projects. So let's continue this, or well, here's another. Yeah,
that's come up with the board. So I mean, one of the problems with success is then it begets more work.
Yeah, but you also got a whole bunch of new members, so that there you go. So I encourage you new members and everybody else to find a little project and to just put some effort into it, because we really do need to make natives the new normal, the native landscapes the new normal. It's important.
Well, you're preaching to the choir here.
I know. Yeah, the other thing I do, and of course I can't do it right now, is I am a presenter on the Holland America cruise lines. And so as a botanist, I do destination-oriented presentations, and that's a different audience. They would be unlikely to have joined the Native Plant Society, but it's fun because they are really enthusiastic about even hard science that I'm handing out to them. So yeah, we need to reach new audiences.
Well, I don't see any more questions for you. Ginny, I want to thank you very much for a great presentation.
Oh, thank you.
And we are at 7:40, so this is a good time for us to end the meeting. Thank you all
Okay.
for attending. I noticed that we had a remarkable attendance for your presentation, Ginny, so you're popular.
that's
but
good.
no, you're not. Yeah.
That's good. Well,
Thank
thanks for
you.
having me, and keep up a good work.